our faces, which is a little bit disconcerting. But I'm going to plow on, and I've left spaces within the presentation so that we can engage and you can ask me questions as we go through. So I'm a teacher at City College Plymouth. I have basically a degree in education and training. I also have qualifications in assessment and quality assurance. I've been at City College Plymouth since 1991, and I've been a teacher trainer since 2011. I'm currently responsible for delivering qualifications at level 3 and level 4, both teacher training and assessor's certificates and internal quality assurance certificates. Unfortunately, there are so many of you that I won't get a chance to speak to you all individually, but I hope that gives you an idea of my background and what I'm actually doing on a day-to-day basis. So in today's session, what we want to do is give you an idea of what a UK-style presentation and delivery is like at level 3. I've given many opportunities for you to ask questions, so please use the chat box when we get to those points, or make a note of your questions as we go along. I'm going to be asking you questions. I want you to ask me questions, and if we have opportunity to take part in a discussion towards the end of the session, then obviously use the chat box for that as well. We're going to record this webinar, so you'll get a copy, and we plan to send you copies of any questions and answers that we haven't dealt with in the webinar, because obviously we have a time limit for these activities. Okay, so by the end of this session, we have some outcomes that we want to achieve. I hope you're familiar with the concept of learning outcomes and learning targets. What I want us to be able to do by the end of the session is to identify some of the ideas behind UK teaching methodology, to also be able to recognise the difference between your style of teaching and how we do this in the UK, and hopefully gather some ideas on how you're going to introduce our style of teaching, UK style of teaching, into your classrooms. What I hope I'll be able to do by the time we've finished is give you a format for you to create those UK style lessons. And then you'll also be able to refer back to this session, I hope, as a guide for delivering a UK style lesson. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is actually tell me about your subject areas, because I don't know a lot about the way that you teach in your part of the world. So I'd like you to use the chat box, please, and identify some of the phrases that you've got on your screen, or anything else that you think best describes a typical session in your area. Okay, if you'd like to make use of the chat screen so I can have some ideas. How do you teach in your area? Which of these phrases best describes your lessons? Okay, I'm not getting many responses here.
Yeah. Maybe you can choose from the choices, right?
You can make a choice from the list that's on the board, or you can mention anything that you think that describes a typical lesson in your area.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody?
Maybe they are typing.
Maybe they are typing. Okay, still not getting anything. Is the chat not working?
Checking. Okay. Teacher Center. Dewi Tri.
Right. I have one. Yeah, okay. Maybe my terminology is slightly different to the terminology that you're used to, but somebody has told me that your approach is teacher-centered. Tell me, do you ask lots of questions in class? Do you get your students to ask you questions in class? No, okay. I'm gonna move on from there. Can I please ask you to use the chat if I say something that you don't understand? Please, that if it needs clarification, it's important that you let me know so that I can give you answers to those questions as we go along. Okay, so let me go back to the presentation. Where are we?
Yeah.
Present. Okay, so somebody told me that what you do is that you actually do a lot of teacher-centered things. And in the UK, we're trying to move away from things that are teacher-centered and make them more student-centered. But I'm going to explain that to you as we go along. So in the UK, the research that we have available to us tells us that where we get interaction with the learners, okay, we get a better result in terms of how the students learn and how they're able to apply their learning. So we use what we call active learning. We also use formative assessment. So this checks what the learner is learning as we go along, not at the end of a course or a program. And we also concentrate on giving really effective, constructive feedback. The three of these things together help us to engage the learner in the learning process. And that's really important to the learner. It's also important to the results that we get. And obviously, the quality of the teacher, of you as the teacher, is also crucial to this process. So even though we call it student-centered, that doesn't mean that the teacher is not an important asset in the room. The other thing that we've learned from the evidence that we have is that we have to make the learning really relevant to the student. The students, the learners, need to know why they're learning something. They need to know how the information you're giving them connects to their course and their assessments. But they also need to know how it applies to real life and work. So they need to be able to make a connection between what they're learning in class and how that connects to their life and their career goals. If we can encourage them to do this, make it possible for them to do this, they then become intrinsically motivated. We don't have to do the hard work of motivating them because they are already motivated themselves to learn. And that's really important. Okay, so I'm sure you'll agree with me that all lessons should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Easiest way to envisage this is if you think about a book. Each part is equally important. If you picked up a book that was missing the first chapter or missing the last chapter, it would be really difficult to get to grips with the actual story itself. And a lesson is just the same. If there is no structured beginning, and if the end just tails off into nothing in particular, then the learners have a hard job making sense and learning, or even just remembering the content of the lesson. So in the UK, every lesson plan will have some key objectives. First of all, it must be relevant to each and every learner. It must have specific learning outcomes. Call them outcomes or learning targets, but they must be clear for each lesson. The lesson must provide the opportunity to check current learning so that we make sure that all learners start from the same point. We must deliver that new material in an engaging format and make the learners work. Okay, it's not enough for them just to sit and listen. We want to make it student-centered, active learning. We have to include formative assessment, and at the end of the session, we want to check that learning targets have been achieved. We have a structure called the Diamond Lesson Plan, which provides a framework to achieve these objectives. Okay. And this is the Diamond Lesson Plan. Now, in a moment, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask me some questions, okay? And I'm going to ask you some questions. But as you can see, this Diamond Lesson Plan has 9 elements. The beginning of the session, which amounts to 20% of the lesson, consists of an appetizer, a big picture, and a recap. Now, in a moment, I'm going to go through each of these individually so you get a good idea of what this actually means. The middle of the lesson, the bit where you do your delivery, is 60% of the lesson, and it covers delivery, questions and answers, and active learning. And then the end of the session, another 20%, you check the learning, you summarize the lesson, and you give the learners a bridge to the next lesson. If you think about the timings here, 20% of a 1-hour lesson is 12 minutes, which leaves us with 36 minutes to actually do our delivery. Now, some of you might think, well, that's ridiculous because I have an hour's lesson, I have to teach for an hour. And sometimes this approach is quite a leap of faith. But as we said just now, the beginning and the end are important. And we have to allocate time to make sure the beginning is relevant and that the end checks that those outcomes that we set have been achieved. And that takes time. Okay. So I'm just going to go through this section, the beginning, and then I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask some questions. So an appetizer is optional, okay? An appetizer is a nice way of engaging with the learners the minute they enter the room. And it can be anything from a little question mark, a quiz that they can do, or it can be a little video, or it can be something associated with what they did over the weekend or in the last lesson. It can be anything that engages them in an enthusiastic way as soon as they arrive. Then we move into the big picture. Big picture is really important because this is where we explain the targets for the lesson. It's important that you are inspiring and you make it relevant to the learners. As we said earlier, it's really important that they understand what they're aiming for and how the information that they're going to receive links into their future assessments and careers. And then, before we get started into the new delivery, we recap. We find out what they know. We ask them what they remember from the previous lesson, if they've discovered anything else, if they've done any reading or research about that material. But we check that what was done in the last lesson has been learnt, inwardly digested, and they can now use that information to build on in this next session. Okay. So, what I'm going to ask you to do now, if you can, I've got a few more chats from the previous one now. I obviously need to wait a little longer. Somebody from Taiwan has told me that you like two-way interaction, which is excellent. But in many cases, somebody else tells me that your delivery is again teacher-centered. So some of you will find that you can engage with this quite happily. Others will find that this is going to be quite a transition from your normal style, but still. So, questions, again, we've just talked about the opening of the lesson, the beginning of the lesson. Is this something that you think you will be able to do, or is it going to cause problems? Do you think that you can work out a way to make this happen in your classrooms, or is it so different that it's going to be difficult? Let me know what you think. Use the chat box. Let me know what you think. I agree. Games are definitely a good way to start a lesson. Don't be afraid to ask me a question if you want me to clarify something. Ravan tells me that sometimes students want to play games all day long, but that's interesting because we can't let them play games, but what we can do is use games in our lessons. Okay, we can use team games and quizzes and make it more engaging for them. So by picking up on what they like doing and using it as a teaching tool, we can encourage them to engage more with what we're doing. Okay. I might have some more questions later on, but I'm going to move on to the second stage now. This is the middle stage. Hang on, I've got a few more things. Yes, somebody has suggested that we have an introductory video, and yes, that's an excellent idea. If you think of your introduction to the session as welcoming guests into your home or into a dinner party, treat your students the same way. If somebody came to your house, you wouldn't leave them standing in the hallway and turn around and leave them. You would engage them in conversation, or you would ask them to sit down and give them a drink, or you would do something to make sure they understood that they were welcome and that you were looking forward to their company. And this is what we have to try and do with our learners. Lots of learners come into the classrooms and they're very apprehensive. And when people are apprehensive, it's difficult for them to learn. So we need to make sure that they are relaxed, that they feel welcome, and we are really pleased to see them there. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the next bit then, which is the actual middle of the session. Okay, let me go to... present. Okay, so the middle of the session. So you'll see in this one that I've got these big red arrows on the diagram. And this means that in this part of the session, you don't have to go through 4, 5, and 6 in exactly that order. If we start with number 5, in any of our lessons, we hope that you will ask questions of all the learners throughout this part of the session, and not to the group, but direct questions to individual learners to make sure that they understand what's happening, but without making them feel that you have been picking on them. Okay? And this is quite difficult to do. But generally, if you ask a question and then don't ask for people to put their hands up, just ask the question and tell the learners to think. And then when they have a time to think, you can pick somebody to answer that question. In that way, you won't always get the best students answering all the questions, but you will get everybody thinking about the question, because nobody knows who you're going to ask. So they all have to think, and that's really important. So ask questions all the time. Your delivery might actually be practical. So you might be demonstrating a practical skill, in which case your learners may be engaged in active learning, doing something with you at the same time as you're delivering new information. So these three sections can be mixed up together, depending on your subject and what your learners have to learn. But if we assume that you're going to do some delivery via a teacher-centered approach, you're going to stand and talk, or you're going to use a PowerPoint, make sure your delivery is in small sections, no more than 20 minutes at a time, and try and use a variety of resources. Okay, so your delivery can be broken up with questions and answers, and then followed by a task. So you give the learners a task which they can do in groups or in pairs, getting them to work together, share their understanding, okay? And that activity should consolidate the material that you delivered. So it should emphasize to the learners the relevance of what's going on, and they should be able to put it into a context where they understand it. Use more questions and answers during the active learning to make sure that they're going in the right direction. So this middle part of your session, in a 1 hour session, is going to take about 36 minutes, thereabouts. It's not absolute, but thereabout. And by the end of it, the learners hopefully will be well on their way to achieving those learning targets that you set at the beginning of the session. Okay, so again, do we have any questions at that point? Does anybody ask questions all the time in their lesson? Tell me, are you asking questions of your learners all the time in the lesson? Tell me yes or no. Good. Amy says that she does. And, oh, I'm not sure which way around I should pronounce your name. Ling says yes, that she does. That's good. Apologies if my pronunciation is bad. I haven't got a clue how I should pronounce your names, I'm afraid, but I'm doing my best. Okay. Do you ask your learners to ask you questions in the lesson? Tell me yes or no. Good, good. People are telling me that yes, they do. That's lovely. Yes. That's really good. That's really good. Yes, but most of the time they don't respond much. Yeah, I experienced that as well. Yes, they do. Okay, this is really good. Amy tells me that they don't respond a lot of the time, and that is difficult. But part of that is getting your learners to relax and understand that it's possible for them to ask questions without causing offense or without appearing to be less capable than their peers, shall we say, because that's one of the fears. People don't want to ask questions if they think it will make them look stupid. And one of the things that we do by making them work with their friends is they can ask their friends or their classmates questions that maybe they wouldn't ask you. And sometimes that's really helpful, because if they're working and you're observing and listening, sometimes you pick up on those questions and you can ask them anyway. Okay, so you can give them the answers without them having to ask you directly in front of everybody else, which is very useful. Jen says that she provides a reward during a questions and answer session, which works well. Yes, I imagine that would work well. What kind of reward do you offer them, Jen? Sweets. I'm sure your students absolutely love you, Jen. That's wonderful. Okay, so everybody's got their techniques, and your techniques can be useful in working towards this style as well. Okay, so one of the things that we have to remember, oh, somebody says the score is the cheapest reward. Yes, everybody likes to win, don't they? That's good. Yeah, so sometimes this is not a complete change of direction. It's simply making the skills and the familiarity that your learners already have and gently moving them in a slightly different direction. So that's really good. Let me just talk to you now about what we mean by active learning, because that's quite an important element of this. Okay, so we try to make sure that within a classroom, and it's very difficult through this current situation where we're having distance learning, but in a classroom, we try to get the learners in pairs or in small groups, not necessarily with their friends. Sometimes we just give them a number and we say, everyone with number 1 works over here, everyone with number 2 works over here, and we pair them up with people, or we put them in groups with people that they sometimes don't necessarily work with. This takes a lot of getting used to, but once they realize that they've got to work and this is how the lessons are going to be, they do get used to it. It's not a good idea to let them always work with their friends, because you'll sometimes find that one friend does the work, or that they won't be honest with each other because they're friends. Getting used to this idea of actively questioning the learners, but actually getting them to ask questions as well, is really important. That is quite an essential part of this process. We also look at embedded formative assessment. So this is where you as the teacher ask lots of questions, and you've told me that you already do this, and that's something that obviously you can develop and keep doing. We give the learners problem-solving tasks. They can do them in groups or in pairs so that they work together and they share their understanding, and we look at the result. They can have a project, which often they do in slightly larger groups, sometimes like in engineering or in hotel and catering. They can work on a project which might be to build something or to create a menu for a particular occasion, and they'll work together and share their ideas. And this part of it is really important, because when they get out into the big wide world, they will have to work with other people. And it's important that they learn to work on their subject with other people. And sometimes we're really lucky and we can create a work-based or a simulated practical environment. At the college in Plymouth, we have hairdressing salons, we have beauty therapy salons, we have restaurants, we have situations where our media people put on performances, and where our dance people put on performances. So they actually get to experience something that is much more real and much closer to something they'd experience in the real world. And that's why the applying concepts and principles to the real world is important. They need to go out there ready to hit the ground running, ready to start, and so they don't need a constant shepherding when they get into the workplace. They also need to reflect on the issues and learn from any mistakes that are made. And this is really, really important. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes, as I'm sure you all know and appreciate. But learners are afraid of making mistakes. They are afraid that it makes them look foolish. So we have to teach them or encourage them to appreciate their mistakes and take the positives from those and move forward. The last thing that we want to think about is about metacognition, getting the learners to understand how they as individuals learn. And this will promote greater student ownership of the learning. So the emphasis for learning is not about you as the teacher feeding them a load of information. It's about them actually getting to grips with the material and promoting their own learning and making sure that they understand things, making sure they ask questions when they don't understand things. And we can help them with that as well. Okay. So, again, because I'm feeling a long way away from you here, anything that I've said here, is there anything that I've said here so far that you think, nope, this isn't going to work? Or how do I make that work? Okay. I'm just going to give you a few minutes to set me some questions, ask me some questions. Okay. Roman has asked me how we apply STEM amongst students. During this middle section, well, we have a number of ways of doing it. You can introduce any STEM element into your appetizer if you wish to. And that if your lesson doesn't naturally lend itself to STEM subjects, then the appetizer is a very good way of getting some of that into the session. You'll notice that in this session, I gave you percentages. In my class, when I deliver it at college, I would ask them to calculate those percentages for me. Okay, so we can sneak in little bits of STEM subjects anywhere that you think it will fit in. It's quite nice if it's subtle, so that nobody really realizes that they're being encouraged to engage in technical subjects, maths or whatever, because it's not scaring them. So we would go about doing it that way. Okay, I hope that helps, Roman. Can I explain more about metacognition? Yes, Jen, I can. I've got a couple of slides at the very end of this presentation, which I think will give you a bit more information about that. Okay, right. So let's move on then to the end of the session. Okay, so the end of the session. Now, again, this is 20% of the session. So this is the last 12 minutes in a 1-hour session. The important thing that you've got to do after your active learning session is to check that they've actually learned something. Not generally as a group, but find a way to check with each learner that they've learned something. We try and do this without putting learners on the spot, without making them feel uncomfortable. So again, you could have a team game, a quiz, a little multiple choice questionnaire that they mark themselves or they give to their partner to mark, okay? But effectively what you're going to do is discuss the active learning session. What did they discover? What do they not understand? And use your questions and answers at this point to link to the outcomes at the beginning. Confirm to them when they've understood something and they've got it right. Praise them. That's really important. When they get it right, say, yes, you've done well. That's excellent. What did you think about so-and-so? Use it as a conversational activity if you can, and encourage them to engage with you. Once we've actually established that they have learned what you wanted them to learn, we summarize the lesson, if you like. We talk about what we intended to learn, why we intended to learn it, and we confirm their achievement. If you didn't finish something or they didn't finish something, tell them you're going to do it in the next lesson. We'll come back to that next time I see you, so that they don't worry that they haven't done as much as you thought they were going to. Okay? Once they start worrying and they get anxious, learning becomes more difficult. And then the next bit is your bridge. Link enthusiastically to the next session. Tell them that, you know, they've done so well in this session. Next time we're going to move on and we're going to talk about this and this and this. Try and set them an independent learning task, something they can do in their own time. Maybe give them some learning resources for private study. Say, if you look at this website, you know, this is interesting. We'll talk about it at the beginning of the next lesson. But create a connection between this session and the one they're going to have next time. Okay? So this setup is pretty straightforward, really. If you follow each stage as you go along, you will effectively produce a diamond lesson plan, and it will be more like a UK style lesson. But to reassure you, it won't happen instantly. Okay? Your learners have been used to the way that you deliver normally, and changing it is going to take a little bit of time. In our own college, when we first started doing this, it took time. But over a period of months and then years, this has become the format that we use, and it's an effective format. So I'm going to miss this set of questions because I obviously spoke to you a little bit earlier. But I just wanted to talk to you about formative assessment. So, formative assessment gives information to both the teacher and the learner. Now, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the process of asking questions in class, and some of you have told me that that is what you do. So this is a basic element of formative assessment, asking questions in class. It tells us what the learner knows, but it also tells the learner what they know. So it's important that we obviously give them constructive feedback. From time to time, we will have a learner that doesn't give us the correct answer. And that gives us an opportunity to open up that question to a bit more discussion. It enables other people to add information. It enables you as the tutor to give more information, to clarify that particular point. But that's only one part of formative assessment. We can do lots of other different things that will produce constructive results for us. And when we have those results, we can give constructive feedback. So formative assessment can take a number of styles. It can be totally informal. Okay, so questions and answers, team activities, observation. And it should allow you to build up a picture of the learner's progress and understanding. And all that will be required from you in this instance is verbal feedback. So you might be watching them do a task and moving around the room and giving them comments on what they're doing, how they're doing it, or asking them why they're doing that in a certain way. Sometimes you ask them why they're doing something a certain way when you think it's a little bit odd, and they'll explain it to you, and then you can give them constructive feedback. It can be semi-formal, and sometimes this can be student marked. So it can be a short multiple choice test, or it can be a team game. It can still be a team game, but with a scoreboard. Self and peer assessment is another important element of formative assessment, where learners mark each other's work or mark their own work. You can record some of this, but it has no impact on the final grade. But if you're recording it, it gives you an opportunity to give more constructive feedback. And then there's a formal formative assessment. So this might be an activity that they do that you mark. And this provides you with an opportunity to give them detailed constructive feedback. Okay, but none of the formative assessment contributes to a final grade. It is simply developmental. And that's important. And it's important that the learner understands that it's developmental so they can get it wrong, learn from their mistakes and move forward. Okay, and it's not going to have an impact on their final grade. The only real impact it will have on their final grade is hopefully that they will have learnt more effectively. And so therefore, when it comes to their final assessment, they will be more successful. So what do we mean by effective feedback? What do we mean by constructive feedback? I don't know if you've heard of Jeff Petty, but he is one of the people that we use. He's done a lot of research in the classroom on things that actually work with real students. And he has come up with this concept of medals, missions, and goals. Basically, it's important that all learners have a goal. They need to know where they're going. They need a pathway to an end result. Otherwise, what's the point? But when we're talking about feedback, we're talking about the medal and the mission in order to get the learner further along the pathway to their goal. So when we look at a piece of work or when we observe a piece of work, the first thing we need to do is give the learners a medal, tell them what they did well and why what they did was good. So this helps them to identify what we're looking for, but it also helps them identify what is good about the work that they did. Once we've given them the medal, we then give them the mission. So this is their target. And their target, we try to link to assessment criteria. We say things like, in order to achieve 2.1, you need to do this, this, and this. And those missions need to be really clear. If we've given the medal appropriately, they will know what they did that was good, and they can use that information in achieving the mission, because they will understand what's expected of them more clearly and understand the level, the content, the caliber of what you're looking for in the mission. And now, ideally, this should happen throughout the classroom activities. If it's written down, then obviously the learner will have it to refer back to. But quite often, the conversations that you have with the learner are actually very memorable as well. Talking to them as an individual, identifying what you were pleased with, what you thought was effective, and what the next stage is. And in some cases, you can ask the learner what they think the next stage is. They can establish that mission for themselves, because all this is about promoting student ownership of the process so that they don't feel like they're a victim of assessment. They are actually using assessment to promote their own learning. And we feel that's pretty important. And we get better results when this is happening. Okay. Sorry, wrong direction. Okay, so we're back to questions now again. I've given you an awful lot of information, and I've got a couple of extra questions here to ask, but I'm just going to give you a little break now, and I want you to think about questions that you need to ask, because I've given you a lot of information to take in quite a short space of time, and I need you to think about that now and think about any ideas that you might want to put forward, any questions that you want to ask me, anything you're not clear about, okay? I've got a couple of things. Oh, nice to have you join us, Peter. That's lovely. No worries. Classes always come first. Raymond asked me, can we give homework often? If you think about the last section as a bridge, as opposed to homework, We normally think that homework is something that we as the tutor have to mark. But what we want to do with the bridge to the next session is give them information that we hope that they will engage with because they're enthusiastic about the subject. So it's not homework that you have to mark, but it's something that we hope will encourage them to come into the next lesson with ideas of their own. So you can do that as often as you like. Sometimes they pick up on it and sometimes they don't. But that just gives you a better picture about who is really engaged and who isn't. So I'm just going to literally give you about 4 minutes to think about what I've gone through and come back to me with some questions. Hopefully a few more of you will feel like putting pen to paper and coming up with some queries or some ideas. Okay. Okay, guys, I've got a few questions come up here. I'm just going to go through them quickly. Well, not that quickly. Nico has asked me about our school strategies during this pandemic. Do we have ideas, applications, or suggestions to make the online lessons feel more alive? Nico, to be honest, we're all in a learning curve, a very steep learning curve at the moment. And we have a lot of resources available from our college, and I'm sure that we will be able to put together some ideas for you. I haven't got a lot at my fingertips right now because I'm also learning very rapidly what it's like to deliver online. It's very intense, both for the learner, I think, and for the tutor. But we'll try and put something together for you, Nico, so that we've got some ideas that we can send to you after the presentation. Hope that's okay for the moment. Right, Vili has said that the feedback model, medals and missions, yeah, Vili, it's a very good one. It takes a lot of time and energy from the tutor in terms of giving that really constructive feedback and dealing with the learners one-on-one. But that said, it also really works. So that's really important. It'll take time to put in place. It'll take time to learn to be very positive, always positive and not negative. But at the end of the day, you'll get good results from it. Yeah, Amy, the ask questions slide, that's quite interesting because I spoke to my colleague Danielle about whether or not I should include the ask questions slide. For my own students, I don't normally do this. I just stop and ask questions. But if you think that it would put your learners at ease, then it's an excellent idea. Pop it in and use it. But don't restrict them to just asking questions when you put the slide up. Let them ask questions when they need to ask questions. Peter, a forum or Facebook group that we all join. We have what we call Staff Central, which is a resource with many links in it. So yes, we do have a forum that we use, but it is internal. And people post good ideas for good practice on it. We get our updates, all our policies and procedures are on it. People put, we get links to a whole load of learning resources and external resources like Google Classroom, Google Educator and things like that. So yeah, we do have an awful lot of support and opportunity to share within the college environment. Okay. And thank you for that last one, Danielle. Yes, the bridge to the next session is effective. If you can actually get that into your lesson, it's really effective. And in time, learners will engage with it, even if they don't at the beginning. Okay, just let me see if there's any more there that I've missed. Okay, good idea from Raymond. Giving the students a board game of Snakes and Ladders, which he's modified. It makes it interesting, but is it also about a test or just an assessment? The formative bits, Raymond, are about the learners enjoying their learning, but actually learning at the same time. If they enjoy it and they don't realize they're learning, that's great. Whether or not you think of it as a test or an assessment or just a teaching strategy, it doesn't really matter. As long as they're learning, they're enjoying it, and you're getting the information about their learning that you need to move forward with them. Okay, so no, it doesn't matter what you call it. It matters whether or not they're enjoying it and learning at the same time. Vili says, do we have any tips on how to group students better? To be honest, Vili, it's about your own class and your own students. I have a tendency to simply mix them up. I have quite a lot of adult learners, and I will ask them to not sit next to somebody they sat next to last week. And that way, when I put them in pairs or in groups, they're working with 2 or 3 people that they don't normally sit next to or don't normally talk to. And that works really well with my adult learners. Sometimes with younger learners, you have to be a little bit more authoritative, and you can hand them out numbers and put them in groups according to their numbers. You can put them in groups according to their ages. Again, try and make it a bit of fun. If they have to get up and move around, that's also a good idea. But it's also something they've got to get used to. If it's not something you've done before, they will be reluctant to begin with, and you might have to be a little bit authoritative and say, I want you to do this now. Okay. You can also think about grouping learners according to abilities. So you can put some high achievers together and lower achievers together. But sometimes it's also good to mix higher and lower achievers together, because learners will learn from each other, and that's quite useful as well. Peter, can you get access to the resources? You can't get access to our internal material, but obviously we can put together a list of external things that you should be able to access. Okay. Thank you, Danielle, for answering, Peter. That's great. Okay, thanks. Oh, Jen, you've hit the nail on the head. This is what being a facilitator is all about. It is about your role changing quite considerably and you managing your classroom as best you can. And you're quite right. Some learners need to be handled very gently so that you don't discourage learning or damage their self-esteem. But this, Jen, you've absolutely captured what this is about. And this is where we say this is a leap of faith. This is, from my point of view, this is actually what makes the teaching hard work. It's enjoyable, but it's hard work. You have to manage your group of learners. You have to manage the ones that are going to achieve a higher level, but never losing faith in the ones below you, below that, who you perhaps think aren't going to do so well and who do need to be gently encouraged and convinced that their efforts will be rewarded and they can do well. I don't know if you have access to a book by a lady called Carol Dweck. She's American, but she talks about the incremental theory. And the incremental theory is about a mindset that says hard work and effort will be rewarded by higher achievement. And the objective as a tutor is for you to have that mindset, but also to encourage all your learners to have the same mindset. If they believe that their hard work and their effort is going to result in more achievement, then that's the way to go. Not everybody's going to be an A-star learner, but certainly with this mindset, we can expect the lower level learners to come up at least a couple of grades. But that's really down to you in your classroom, I think. Raymond, do I agree for the honour class? I'm not sure what an honour class is. I'm thinking that perhaps, Raymond, it's streaming pupils. And we still have a system in this country of grammar schools, but within our further education environment, no, we don't stream people. We encourage all learners to work together for a common aim they all want to achieve. And getting them used to working with other people of higher or lesser abilities is a very good skill for the workplace. So within FE, no, we We don't have a streaming system. We don't have an honour class. We have a class of learners who come from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of cultures. We have probably more diverse classes than in any other part of our education system, except general school, I think. So get them to work together, get them to interact. Okay, yeah, thank you for that suggestion, Peter. Danielle and I will talk about that later. Okay, right, okay. Thank you there. That's wonderful. I'm glad this has got you thinking about some of the issues and some of the differences, and that's really what I hope to achieve. So I'm just going to carry on with the end of the presentation now. I've got about 20 minutes or so, I think. So we'll just move on with the next bit. Okay. Okay, so we've talked through this bit really, and we've been talking about this in a way. But I just want you to just answer one question for me, if you can, but also think about, how you'll overcome the difference and manage the change. I mean, really, this is what we've been talking about, and I think you've identified some of the differences, although an awful lot of you seem to be actually incorporating elements of our UK style. Not that it's our style, but you already do this in your lessons. So for you, for those of you who are already using questions and answers, the change is not going to be so dramatic, but you might find that the peer groups and the group working is different. So going back to your chat, can you tell me individually, every one of you, can you tell me what is the biggest difference between what you currently do and what I have now described? Okay, can you answer that question first for me, please? Everybody. What is the biggest difference between what you currently do in your classroom and what I have just described to you? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's lovely, Raymond. I'm glad to hear there's not so much of a difference. That's great. Peter says there's more teaching time in Asian styles and students don't ask questions since socially it's seen as unacceptable. Good point. Okay. Message from Maria for Peter. Amy says that your learners are more passive. Okay. Okay, can I have some responses from people who haven't contributed at the moment, please? Chui Mang Chong, Asians have less group discussions, teacher teaching all the time. Thank you for that one. Interesting. Victor tells me that Asian teachers are more authoritative, which eventually causes students to be more quiet. Interesting. to break the ice, I will use a funny approach in order to engage them. Good luck, Victor. That's very brave of you. Okay. Now that's interesting. Students have to memorize more than actually understand, says Peter. And there's also issues with the personality could be the gap differences. Okay. Okay. And Vili says that the lessons don't prepare them for the real world. It's very theoretical. Hope to change this. Okay. I suppose one of the important things is how willing you are to change things. From what I can tell from the responses I have here, the biggest thing that is occurring, although it doesn't apply to all of you, is the fact that your teaching sessions are very student-centered, very teacher-centered. Get this right, Julia. They're very teacher-centered. There's a lot more teacher talk, and basically the teacher takes charge and the learners sit and listen. We refer to this as passive learning, and as I think Peter told me, it's more about memory than it is about actually learning. And that's quite a significant difference. And when we ask people just to memorize things, it doesn't necessarily mean they understand it, as Peter has pointed out. But one of the things I think, pointed out is that if they don't understand, they're not really prepared for the real world and how things work out there. And I think this is really important today, in today's world, is that they are, when they leave us as teachers, they can go confidently into the work and understanding of what's going to be expected of them. From a purely mercenary point of view, if we send them into the workplace equipped like that, they're going to be far more productive. And that's equally important as well. Raymond has put a statement at the end. We need more practical examples, maybe sometimes, so we can give it to our students too. Raymond, are you talking about practical examples from us, or are you talking about that you as an individual tutor need to put together practical examples? I'll wait till Raymond answers that one in a minute. So what I was going to say is, what are the feeling I get from your questions when it comes to overcoming the difference and managing the change? I think from what you're saying is the first people that have to change is going to be you as the tutors. And maybe it's going to be you and your learners going through a changing process together. Yeah, and sometimes it's quite okay to say to learners, I'm learning too, because in that way you're learning, or you're teaching by example. You're saying, I'm learning, you're learning, we're learning together. And that's quite a nice idea for learners to actually, work with. So in the next few slides, I'm going to give you a couple of ideas to move forward with. The first one is about encouraging learners to take responsibility for their own learning. And the second one is something for you to do after you've left today, to assess how your skills stand up to actually doing this. Thank you, Satana. I'm glad you approve of the active learning. That's excellent. I'm hoping you'll be able to all put this into practice. So let me just go back to the next few slides and go through the last little bits. So one of the things that I found that I thought was important, and this is something that I have to bear in mind. When education is not about learning facts, it's about training the mind to think. Once we've achieved that, then actually every individual will be a lot more productive. And this is really where the question was earlier about metacognition. Metacognition is about training the mind to learn. It's about helping learners understand how they learn, because the evidence we have shows that once the learner understands their own process of how they learn, they then learn faster and better. Okay? It enables them to make connections between their studies, their career options, their personal ideas, and it's highly motivating because all of a sudden, instead of being the person who has to sit there and listen, they are actually engaged with their own learning. They're achieving something, and that in itself is very motivating. So as a tutor, you can help them develop this ability by getting them to think about their learning with 9 key questions. And these are the key questions. When you give them a task to do, before they do the task, they should prepare, and they should ask themselves this question. Is it similar to the previous task? What do I want to achieve? What do I have to achieve? And what should I do first? So this is organizational, and it's getting them to connect with previous learning, previous activities, and think about how that applies to this, and then organizing themselves. What do I need to do first? Once they're engaged in the task, they have to ask themselves, am I on the right track? Let me sit and think a moment. Is this going in the right direction? Is there anything I can do differently that will make this work better? And who can I ask for help? Yeah, no, the obvious answer to the last one is the tutor. But if they're afraid to ask for help, that's not going to happen. So this is about you being approachable and being the person they can turn to. Once the task is finished, the learner should review it. What worked well? What could I have done better? And can I apply this to other situations? So these key questions will get your learners thinking about their learning process. And once they get thinking about their learning process, they will become more confident, they will become more organized, and they won't just be memorizing, they will actually be starting to learn. They'll be able to understand and apply what they've learned to different situations. That is vitally important to their ongoing progress. Okay? So, I'm going to leave this one just for the moment, and we'll have the questions at the end. So, we've covered an awful lot of material now. So at the end of a session, I would normally say to my learners, have we achieved our outcomes? Are you, as an individual tutor, able to identify some of the ideas behind UK teaching styles? Do you recognize the difference between your teaching style and the teaching approaches that I've covered today? Have you got some idea of how you might manage the changeover? Can you use the information about the Diamond Lesson Plan to create your own UK style lessons? And will you be able to use this session as a guide for a UK style lesson? If you look back over these slides, you will find that I have, as far as possible in this format, followed the Diamond Lesson Plan. Okay, so the slides themselves should help you to give you an idea of how to create your lesson plans. So just quickly, before I go on to the final bit, has anybody got any comments? Do you think we have achieved our outcomes? Has anybody got any questions, please, before I finish up the session? Okay. Okay. Well, the questions aren't streaming in, so I'm hoping that's quite positive and that you've all got some idea of what I've been trying to get across to you today. But just before I go, I've got a little activity that I want you to think about in your own time. So we've talked about you helping the students to engage with this process, but perhaps also part of the process, as we said, is you changing your delivery style and developing the skills that you need in order to do just that. So this last slide is a self-assessment activity. Now, we ask our learners to do self-assessment, and the key to being good at this is to be honest. So this pyramid is how we could use this to rate our lessons at home. So in the City College, we have a grading process for lessons. It goes from 1 to 4, 1 being the best lesson and 4 being a not such a good lesson. So on this pyramid, if we were to rate it, if a person came in with just subject knowledge, they would get a grade 4, not a particularly good lesson. If they had subject knowledge which was planned and organized effectively, they could possibly get a grade 3, which is also not a particularly good lesson. If they have the subject knowledge, they can plan and organize effectively, and they have incorporated active learning in their lessons, which engages the learner, they would get 2. Now that is a good lesson, and we expect all our staff to be at a grade 2. The icing on the cake is the ability to enthuse the learner. So everything from the bottom of the pyramid up, plus the ability to enthuse the learner, so we get a wow lesson, and that would get a grade 1, which we term as outstanding. Okay, so everyone is expected to be at grade 2. If they're not at grade 2, we would give them extra training to improve their lessons. But if they get to the top of the pyramid with all those things underneath in place, then that would be a grade 1. So for you to do in your own time a self-assessment activity, do you think that you have all the subject knowledge? Do you think you have the ability to plan and organize effectively? How are you going to engage the learner? And do you think you enthuse the learner? I'm going to leave that one with you to think about. My very last slide, I think, is some references, some books. I don't know if you can get hold of them, but I think that these might be useful sources of information for you. The one that isn't on there is the one I mentioned while I was talking, by Carol Dweck. But if anybody wants that information, please let the organizer know and we can pass that on to you. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me today. We've still got, I think, probably a few minutes left. So if there are any further questions before we round up, please come through to me on the chat line.
Okay, thank you so much, Julia and Daniel, for today's interactive session. It's very good and very informative information about the UK education system and also method of teaching. As I can I want to create a little bit summary about today's session about the methodology. That mostly Asia, we do teacher-centered than student-centered. That it's a very good engagement and also feedback from Indonesia or Malaysia or Asian schools that we can learn more about the UK methods and also how we do we do teaching in the UK. And if I can make a little bit summary about today's session, is actually in the teaching and learning process, we have we likely, like in the party, we have appetizer, like a beginning of the teaching and learning process, and we have a main course, which is the middle or the main process of students learning, and we also have a dessert as the end of our activity. Is that right?
That's a lovely analogy. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly, and that's a very good way of thinking about it, and the purposes that each of those courses serve. So yes, that's a good way of looking at it, Maria.
Yeah, and student-centered is like a student finds out what is the main point of the 2 days, like 2 days learning and teaching process. And the main point is to make students understand about how, about what is the main point of 2 days learning or 2 days subject, something like that. And students can answer with every answer, no wrong and no false answer. The point is nothing is wrong with the mistakes, right? And
no, that's absolutely right.
More and more about their point of view.
Yes.
And critical thinking will be very developed in the teaching.
I think from some of the comments we had is that some people have said that, you know, that in your Asian classes, that the teacher is the focal point. And I think in our classes, we try to make the learners the focal point. And so therefore, part of the change is going to come from the teachers in the first place, relinquishing that authority. I mean, they're still in charge. You can't help that. But it's making the learners see them as an approachable mentor rather than an authority figure that they dare not question.
But there are some obstacles, but as a teacher, we need to find out the strategies to overcome obstacles. Thank you so much, Julia, for today's session. It's very informative, and I think we have one last question from Peter. It's like about the pyramid that you mentioned earlier. How he said
it looks like a Maslow pyramid. Peter, there's an awful lot of things out there that look just like Maslow's pyramid. But if you know the bottom two layers about giving learners a sense of belonging and making them feel comfortable and welcome, that is definitely a very good starting point. If they come into the class because they want to, because they're looking forward to talking with you, to looking forward to interactive and actually looking forward to learning something, and the sense that they belong in that classroom, that's a really, really good place to start. So yeah, Maslow did have a good point there.
All right. Thank you so much. I think this is the end. Yes, this is the end of our phase 1A session for pre-sessional teachers training. We will have another teachers training, and we will let you know about the next teachers training for the IPC program. So thank you so much for all the teachers for your engagement. I really appreciate it, and I personally think that I learned a lot. I do really learn a lot about education system, both in Indonesia or because I'm from Indonesia. So yeah, I do really learn a lot about the difference between Indonesian and UK education system. Okay. Thank you so much, Julia and Daniel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. And thank you.
Bye, everyone.
See you.
Okay.